one little word, and it is flowing from so many pens these days.
Yes.
The little word called solidarity. Now, I wonder whether this little word solidarity also includes conformity.
Yeah.
You think so?
And compromise, probably.
Yeah, but only in terms of the common good, right?
Correct.
Absolutely. So we need to look at where this new education is leading to. And we had, in part one, we spoke about that. Now let's look at this word solidarity. We'll start with a video, and then we'll continue from there.
Reflecting on the dramatic change in the world over the last year, I paid a visit to Bretton Woods in New Hampshire, where 44 men signed our Articles of Agreement in 1944. Our founders faced two massive tasks: to deal with the immediate devastation caused by the war and to lay the foundation for a more peaceful, more prosperous post-war world. At the conclusion of the conference, John Maynard Keynes captured the significance of international cooperation as hope for the world. If we can continue, the brotherhood of men will have become more than a phrase, he said. As we look forward to welcoming Andorra as our 119th member, the work of the IMF is testament to the values of cooperation and solidarity on which a sisterhood and brotherhood of humanity is built. Today, we face a new Bretton Woods moment. We know what action must be taken right now. A durable economic recovery is only possible if we beat the pandemic. I urge you to support production and distribution of effective therapies and vaccines to ensure that all countries have access. We can do better than build back the pre-pandemic world. We can build forward to a world that is more resilient, sustainable, and inclusive. We must seize this new Bretton Woods moment. I see three imperatives. First, the right economic policies. And policies must be for people. COVID-19 has underscored the importance of strong health systems. Rising inequality and rapid technological change demands strong education and training systems to increase opportunity and reduce disparities. Just as the pandemic has shown that we can no longer ignore health precautions, we can no longer afford to ignore climate change. My third imperative. If we don't like this health crisis, we will not like the climate crisis one iota. Since the pandemic began, we have committed over $100 billion, and we still have substantial resources from our $1 trillion in lending capacity. The doubling of the new arrangements to borrow and a new round of bilateral borrowing arrangements preserves our much-needed financial firepower. Our founders did it. It is now our turn. This is our moment.
Well, my young friend, what do you say about that?
Well, she brought all the aspects in that we've been discussing.
Yes,
Solidarity.
she mentioned them one by one.
Education, solidarity, conforming with the system that they implement. And what's interesting also for me was the lending. Once you go into contract, obviously, with them, there are certain rules that has to be followed.
He who pays the piper calls the tune. Isn't that correct?
Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that health is a very important issue, but it is nothing compared to the climate crisis that is coming. We always have these stepping stones, you know?
Yeah. Where are we heading?
Where are we heading? Where's the final step? Where are we heading? So we've got the disease, then we have the climate, and then we must have the human solidarity. Do you know what? I was looking at the picture there of all these people sitting with masks. Now, we're not debating here the importance of the mask or the non-importance of the mask. That debate is raging all over the world. But one side issue that you cannot escape is the uniformity. Everybody becomes faceless.
Yep.
We all become part of this one society in solidarity to this great enemy that is approaching us, whether it be a virus or climate change or whatever that enemy is. And the question always arises, where does the enemy come from? Who controls and defines the enemy? So that's our introduction, and she used the word solidarity, of course. So that was the view of the IMF, right? The International Monetary Fund. But let's have a look at some of these issues, because it tells us where we are heading.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was most touched to have been asked to speak to you as you gather for this very special concert. And I did just want to pay tribute to the United Nations for bringing us all together in this way. This dreadful pandemic comes at a time when, as I know only too well, the Pacific region is already facing the accelerating and terrifying impacts of climate change.
Around the world, we're closing borders. COVID-19's on the rise. A new world order behind closed doors. The storm will pass, we will survive. We will rise again. I'll rise again. We will rise again. Our world will rise again.
Well, we heard all the same rhetorics again, starting with COVID. We will wear masks, we will get a new world order, and we will rise. You know, when they say we will rise, you know what comes to mind is that grand mural in the Great Hall of the United Nations of the phoenix rising from the ashes. And in the occult circles, we know, of course, that the phoenix is Lucifer, who will rise upon the ashes and set up his kingdom, his one world government. Well, that was the dream of the Luciferians throughout history. And last time we started with the Gnostic people and the Medicis, and that dream of a uniform world was virtually shattered by Protestantism.
Yes.
And Protestantism had to be destroyed. 500 years. And in 2017, for the first time, Roman Catholicism celebrated together with Protestantism. Not because of the Reformation, but because of its destruction.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Because solidarity came in.
Yes. Now it's time for the new world. Rising out of the ashes, the phoenix will rise. Now this word solidarity, where everybody is of one mind again, and one way of thinking, and snow becomes black.
Yeah.
Pope Francis on solidarity, we must always walk in the presence of the Lord, in the light of the Lord, always trying to live in an irreprehensible way. Solidarity as a moral virtue and social attitude born of personal conversion calls for commitment on the part of those responsible for education and formation. Now, what kind of language is that?
Well, the education part I know is Jesuit, but I don't understand the formation part.
Aha! Now, formation, to be formed in a particular image. This was the heart and the core of Jesuit teaching, of Ignatian teaching, to form a person so that he conforms. So in other words, they want to give you a teacher, which they call a coach.
Okay.
And that coach must instill his virtues and his thinking upon you. And in these groups of think tanks, you were not to oppose, but were to accept whatever came from this so-called coach. So spiritual formation
And spiritual directors.
and spiritual directors, this is pure Jesuit teaching.
Okay.
So they want to form you into a brainless creature of conformity.
And this happens in Christian
Education.
as well, in churches. I'll put links in to your lectures that you made on the Jesuits and the Counter-Reformation.
Absolutely. Those would be
Those two-
interesting
there's two.
links for people to watch. So, yes, so they want to form the thinking and the individual. And as we said, that means to conform. Here are some of the top Pope Francis solidarity quotes. There are actually 15. We won't go through them. Solidarity is drawing closer to your neighbors. Solidarity entails the awareness of being part of a single body, while at the same time involving a capacity on the part of each member to sympathize with others and with the whole. When one suffers, all suffers, for solidarity is no mere ideal. It is expressed in concrete actions and steps that draw us closer to our neighbors in whatever situation they find themselves. So this was Pope Francis's address to the heads of state, 2017. Here's another quote. Solidarity is more than a feeling. It's a commitment to the common good. We always have that sneaking in, right? So in other words, if the common good demands something which is contrary to your conscience, then solidarity demands it.
Yes.
For solidarity is much more than a feeling of vague compassion or shallow distress at the misfortunes of so many people, both near and far. Solidarity is a firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is spiritual formation. You will submit to the thinking of your superiors.
Yeah, and they want to re-educate you because, like they said,
Absolutely.
if you see something as white and they say it's black, you have to
You
say
better
it's black.
say it's black. A firm and persevering determination to commit oneself to the common good. That is to say, to the good of all and of each individual, because we are all really responsible for all, because compassion flows from fraternity. That's why he has this new encyclical as well, which, as we have seen, is contrary to the law of God.
Yes.
And he makes no bones about it, that salvation is a collective. It's not an individual matter. But the Bible makes it quite clear that you will stand before God as an individual and give an account.
Yes.
Here's the Vatican News. Pope Francis, no one is saved alone. Pope Francis is inviting leaders of other faiths to work together with the gentle strength of faith to end all conflicts. His appeal comes as part of his discourse at an international meeting for peace held in Rome and organized by the community of St. Egidio, entitled No One is Saved Alone, Peace and Fraternity. Is that true?
No.
No. No, you have to be saved as an individual.
Yes, you had.
You have been given the capacity to choose.
Absolutely. That's what I wanted to say. Free choice.
And I have repeated this so many times. Freedom of choice is so important to God that he was prepared to die for it. And if it is so important to God that he was prepared to die for it, who is somebody or anybody who says that you have to go along with their way of thinking for the sake of the common good and for solidarity. Because if it is contrary to the law of God, it is contrary to God's will, and it has consequences. On Tuesday, 20 October, Pope Francis will participate in an international prayer for peace initiative entitled No One is Saved Alone, Peace and Fraternity. So on Tuesday afternoon, the religious leaders will pray separately in venues across the city. Pope Francis, the Patriarch of Constantinople, Bartholomew I, and other Orthodox and Protestant representatives in the Basilica of St. Mary in Araculi, Jews in the synagogues of Rome, Muslim, Buddhists, and representatives of other Eastern religions in the Capitoline museums. There's nothing wrong with people praying, and they're praying in different venues, and there's nothing wrong with people praying in different venues. But where is this leading to? It's leading to a uniformity of thinking in terms of the common good.
Yes, and somewhere there's going to be a compromise.
There must be a compromise. But we cannot speak doctrine.
No.
We can only speak common good. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, page 123. Light, precious light shines upon God's people, but it will not save them unless they consent to be saved by it, fully live up to it, and transmit it to others in darkness. This is the commission of the Church. When you have a meeting of solidarity of this nature, this element has to be suppressed.
It can't, yeah,
It
exactly.
cannot exist, right?
No.
God calls upon his people to act. It is an individual work of confessing and forsaking sins and returning unto the Lord that is needed. One cannot do this work for another. So, what does this statement do in comparison with the other statement that you cannot be saved alone?
It's directly opposite.
It's the exact opposite, right? So, we have two mindsets that are clashing. Now, the fact that the two mindsets might have many sub-organizations is irrelevant. There are only two mindsets.
Correct.
And they are on a collision course.
Yeah. And compromise will have to be made to get them to walk together.
Absolutely. But it is an individual work. And you have a commission. And the commission is that you have to follow the dictates of the gospel.
Correct.
And not the dictates of the common good, if they are in variance
Yes.
with one another. Now, my brother, here's a very interesting little video. It's by the World Economic Forum, so it's a very good source. Not a conspiracy.
No.
It's just a fact. And it has 8 predictions for the world in 2030. Well, what do you make of that?
Well,
The first one was very interesting.
yeah.
You will own
Own nothing.
nothing.
And you'll be happy.
You'll be happy
Yeah.
because you own nothing.
Doesn't that sound a lot like Fratelli Tutti?
Oh, yes, that is Fratelli Tutti. So they're predicting that the Catholic social doctrine will become a reality. Now, what does the 10th commandment say? Thou shalt not covet thy what?
Neighbors,
Goods.
or his wife, or anything.
Does that imply that the neighbor has goods?
Yes.
So how can you cover
Something that's not yours.
That's not yours.
Or that if he doesn't own anything and you don't own anything, nobody owns anything. Yeah?
All right.
So you can't covet.
So you will own nothing. You will rent everything.
Yeah.
And who will you rent it from?
Exactly. Who's owning it?
Somebody must own it if you rent
Renting
it,
it.
right? Don't you pay rent to an owner? So in other words, you will have been disinherited and somebody else will have been empowered.
Yeah.
Now, it'll probably be the mega corporations that are empowered and employ you. And you will receive a state funding. Are we heading in that direction already?
Definitely.
Aren't
And
they saying that everybody must get a basic wage? Everybody must get
Yep.
exactly the same?
Mhm.
So you will be disempowered, and then you will be totally dependent on that source of income. Now, do you think that source of income could come with certain strings attached of obedience, for
Definitely.
example?
Definitely. Like we said earlier also, the same with it's already, you are bound by the rules of the bank that you borrow money from.
Correct. All right, here's another one. Do the Chinese already have a system implemented where they control their society with a point system?
Yes.
And that if you do not conform absolutely to their wishes, then you suffer the consequences?
Correct.
If you have a system like this where you have nothing, you own nothing, that means somebody else owns it because you are renting it and you are getting your basic income. And then you will conform to all the rules and regulations, and all companies will have to conform as well because they will be heavily taxed, it says.
Yeah.
There will be a carbon tax. Do we have a carbon tax already?
Yes. Our country has.
Everybody, if you well, when you used to fly, didn't you pay a carbon
Yeah.
tax in your ticket? Where does that money go to?
Somewhere in the cloud.
It goes to the United Nations. It
Yes.
funds the United Nations, right? So we will have a system of fraternity where you fit into your slot, and that is exactly what we had in the Middle Ages, as we discussed in a previous one. So this world of conformity is depicted as a very happy world.
Yeah. Everybody's happy.
Yes. And if you own nothing, then you have nothing to worry about. You don't
Correct.
have sleepless nights.
Maybe everybody's also happy because they're conforming.
But here's another question. Do you have a sense of responsibility when you own nothing?
No.
Let's take a page out of the communist era. When people were shoved into high rises, were these maintained immaculately and beautified, or were they totally disintegrated to the point of depraved poverty?
Hmm. Everybody was equally poor.
Exactly. Was that happiness?
No.
Does it add to incentive, for example? No. So this new education is rather new, but it's not new. It's been practiced all over the world in many, many places. Now here is a TED talk, and run us through this.
Okay. There was a TED Talk concert, like we've seen that the United Nations had a concert for unity. TED Talk had a concert that was called The Countdown, and it was about climate change.
Aha. And where does that going to lead us? We'll have to find that out.
Yes.
So we're building up, right? So we want this solidarity. Number one, you start off the solidarity by making everybody equal. Nobody owns anything. And you rent everything. And you conform to whatever society has decided for you. By the way, if you own nothing and you rent everything, are you going to be part of the decision-making process?
No.
No, somebody will decide for you. And we already know who those are who will be deciding for you, right?
Is they also said the United States won't be the number one power in the
No,
world. It will
it
be a
won't be.
few.
Because that is steeped in the Judeo-Christian culture. And solidarity means that that can't swing the scepter any longer. In actual fact, this is a war against the Bible and against the God of the Bible. He has to be slotted in. They're not going to eliminate him entirely,
No,
but just give him a slot amongst many. My Bible says there's no other name under heaven and earth whereby you can be saved except the name Christ Jesus. But let us look at this, because here we have some dignitaries.
Today marks the beginning of counting down to zero on the emissions that are warming up our planet.
It's a real honor to introduce, for his first TED Talk, Prince William.
Whilst our generation represents just a blip in the lifetime of these magnificent oaks, we have the power and potential to ensure that they and all life on Earth thrive for another 1,000 years and more. But only if we now unleash the greatest talents of our generation to repair our planet. We have no choice but to succeed. Thank you.
Now, here's a question we haven't yet discussed. How do faith and climate intersect? Well, one person can certainly answer that question better than anyone else. He has made the twin crisis of climate and inequality the central pillars of his action since he was elected in 2013 as the head of the Roman Catholic Church, and his voice talks to believers as well as to non-believers. He's joining us now from his private study in Vatican City. It's an honor and a privilege to introduce His Holiness Pope Francis.
Vorrei proporre oggi 3 piste di azione. Come ho scritto nella Laudato Si, quindi la prima proposta è di promuovere ad ogni livello un'educazione alla cura della casa comune, sviluppando la comprensione che i problemi ambientali sono legati ai bisogni umani. Un'educazione basata sui dati scientifici e su un approccio etico. Sono rincuorato dal fatto che molti giovani hanno già una nuova sensibilità ecologica e sociale e alcuni di loro lottano in modo generoso per la difesa dell'ambiente e per la giustizia. Come seconda proposta bisogna più mettere l'accento sull'acqua e sull'alimentazione. La terza proposta è quella della transizione energetica. Un modo per favorire questo cambiamento è di condurre le imprese verso l'esigenza improcrastinabile di impegnarsi per la cura integrale della casa comune, escludendo dagli investimenti le compagnie che non soddisfano i paramenti dell'ecologia integrale e premiando quelle che si adoperano concretamente in questa fase di transizione per porre al centro della loro attività parametri quali la sostenibilità, la giustizia sociale e la promozione del bene comune. Non possiamo continuare a spremerla come una arancia. E possiamo dire che questo, curare la terra, è un diritto umano. Vi invito quindi tutte e tutti a intraprendere questo viaggio. Così l'ho proposto nella Laudato Si e anche nella nuova enciclica Fratelli Tutti.
That was quite a mouthful. And he gets the celebrities and the important people to introduce him. Now, it's interesting that those companies that do not conform will have to disappear.
Yeah.
And they will be punished. And those that conform will be rewarded. But the basic story remains the same. We're going to go towards a common good. Everybody has to be on board.
Everybody is in solidarity.
Solidarity. And the young people that he was referring to, I wonder whether he's talking about Greta Thunberg. Now we've showed previous pictures with her closing one eye, but here are some new ones, right?
Yeah. And what's interesting is the one on the right. She's holding up a digital currency coin.
Well, one of the things is a common pass. This comes from the World Economic Forum. The challenge. As countries around the world work to overcome the COVID-19 pandemic and restart their economies and tourism, they all face the challenge of how to reopen their borders and allow international travel to resume while protecting their population's health. The solution, a common pass, aims to develop and launch a standard global model to enable people to securely document and present their COVID-19 status, either as test results or an eventual vaccination status, to facilitate international travel and border crossing while keeping their health information private. Now, my young brother, do you think it's going to stay with COVID-19 or will there be something else on the horizon as well?
I'm sure it will be something else.
What about compliance to environmental conditions?
Yep.
Could it be?
I'm sure it will. It's interesting for me. If you get, like you said just now, look at the end where we might be heading, at prophecy, and you have the background, then this whole solution that they give must be somewhat suspicious to you.
Absolutely. So this is very vague because this is ever changing. What is going to be the firm foundation on which you will be granted a pass?
Remember, the IMF said if we didn't like the COVID crisis, we will not like the climate crisis one iota.
Absolutely. Okay. So recognizing that countries will make sovereign decisions on border entry and health screening requirements, including whether or not to require tests, of what type of test to require, Common Pass serves as a neutral platform which creates the interoperability needed for the various travel bubbles to connect and for countries to trust one another's data by leveraging global standards. Now that brings the Chinese model back to mind. There are so many criteria to which you have to conform in order to get a travel pass. And it's not just COVID-19. It's how often you disobey a traffic light.
Yes.
It's how often you do this, that, or the other that the state does not agree with, right? And eventually, could your religious convictions play a role, or any one of those?
Yep.
Surely it's just a stepping stone. It's logical.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to stay with COVID-19. They're already talking about COVID-23.
Common Pass is a platform that lets people safely and securely collect their health information, whether it is a negative COVID test result or eventually a record of a COVID vaccination, manage that information, control it themselves, and then be able to let that information be used to demonstrate that they have had a negative test or they have been vaccinated so they can get on an airplane or travel to another country. For countries, it gives them the ability to actually know confidently that this person who wants to come visit them can actually safely be admitted into their country without risk of exposing other people in the country to COVID.
My brother, that sensitive health information is on the travel pass.
Mhm.
And it says you have been cleared for travel. And that is all that the individual at the point of entry needs to know. Now, what are those criteria which enable them to say you have been cleared for travel? Right?
Yeah. And that data will be governed by the organization that keeps this data.
Absolutely. And the criteria that fit into that data will be determined by whom?
By them.
By somebody, right?
Yes,
It must be
correct.
somebody. It's not going to be you. Okay. So is this a system of absolute surveillance?
Yes.
Yes. Well, here is the president of South Africa, and let's see what he had to say.
As we have said before, we need to utilize various tools in our coronavirus toolbox to fight this virus. We can also use technology to fight the virus. I call on every South African to join the 700,000 South Africans who have downloaded COVID Alert as a mobile app. The COVID Alert app can notify you if you've been exposed to the virus, whether it is in a taxi, a shopping mall, or a social gathering. And it does so without sharing your location or any of your personal information. The app is zero rated by mobile networks, so it won't cost you anything to protect yourself and others. By downloading this app, you help to make the virus visible and break the chain of transmission. We would like, therefore, to appeal to all organizations to encourage their staff, to encourage their visitors, to download the app when they enter their offices, their shops, their schools, universities, or other enclosed facilities or spaces.
Was this only concerning travel?
No.
Didn't he mention other facilities? Shopping?
Universities?
Anything?
Anything.
Now, what does the Bible say? If you do not accept the mark of the beast, then you will not be able to buy or sell. Now, obviously, COVID-19 is not the mark of the beast, nor is the vaccine the mark of the beast, but these are stepping stones.
Yes.
So we have to find the ultimate step where we are heading to, right?
Yes.
Everything is in place. So let's have a look at the next step. There have been a number of initiatives of what has been called a Green Sabbath. And here is a web page, the Green Sabbath Project. This was created by a professor involved in relations with the Jewish religion, etc. And he's asking, is there nothing you can do about the environment? Nothing may be one of the best things you can do. One day every week, do nothing. Take a weekly day of rest. Make it a real Sabbath for you, for earth. Don't drive, don't shop, don't build. Take a walk, eat with friends, play or read with your kids, sing, meditate. The Sabbath is said to be a foretaste of the world to come. Babylonian Talmud, Berakot 57b. I'm wondering, what does the Babylonian Talmud have to do with this issue? Literally, if you care about our future, about your well-being, observe a real Sabbath day of rest. It helps cultivate community, self-discipline, inner calm, contentment. One powerful weapon in the fight against environmental deterioration and climate disaster may just be an age-old spiritual technology. Now, the common good will require that all humanity reach a common accord in terms of this day, right?
Correct.
To make the maximum input, we all have to work together, right?
Yeah. For now, like we said, it might be stepping stones. So even in this initiative, there's stepping stones. They say You can have any day. But we'll see how it progresses.
But even there, they talk about a car-free Sunday, right?
Mhm.
Then you have the Sabbath in an era of climate change. Since the heavily environmentally damaging developed world is made up mostly of monotheists, the impact of eliminating most emissions once weekly would be particularly important. That's interesting. Monotheism has something to do with it.
Yeah.
Judaism and Christianity call the Shabbat an obligation. If we really believe that radical change in our behavior is necessary for environmental reasons, I certainly do, then don't these reasons make Sabbath, along with all other environmental solutions, an obligation? Now we're talking about obligation. Those who are indifferent to religion dislike it or oppose it, may well shout in distress at such a religious approach. Yet it is noteworthy how the new green values such as cooperativeness, mindfulness, simplicity, temperance, respect for nature overlap with values religion at its best has taught for millennia. If 1 billion or more monotheists and interested Hindus, Buddhists, indigenous people, atheists and agnostics observe a weekly Shabbat seriously for the near term, imagine how much of a break we would be giving the world that sustains us, a world that desperately needs some rest. This is a very common theme.
Mm-hmm. And it brings together, like he said, even if you're religious or not, there is overlapping themes that brings you together, that the green people and the religious people can
And the
have
common
this.
good requires it.
That's it.
There's another movement, the World Action on Climate and Health Organization, WACO, and it says quite frankly that for the sake of the common good, we must do whatever it takes to reverse the climate change emergency. Thus we call on all governments worldwide to ban the use of red meat. Also we want to see less private cars on the road, and the use of public transportation should be encouraged. Needless to say, all fossil fuel companies should immediately stop drilling. In addition, we must recreate a new economic system that is environmental friendly. More importantly, we need a universal weekly day of rest that is protected by law for all nations. To give our planet and bodies a rest, and we have 7 years to do all that, or mankind will be extinct. Yes, so it's not an organization that the United Nations speaks about and all of these things, but he has some interesting points. He's talking about a law for all nations, and he's talking about
a universal weekly day.
A universal weekly day, and he's saying that we only have 7 years left. Here is the Church Times, and this is an article about Climate Sunday. 52 Sundays to rescue creation. So the Bishop of Salisbury, the Right Reverend Nicholas Haltom, has described the Climate Sunday initiative launched this weekend by churches together in Britain and Ireland as a brilliant resource to help parishes reach the target of zero emissions by 2030 and campaign for more government action. More than 700 churches from a range of denominations have registered already. Martin, just to wrap this up, we see that solidarity is leading us to a particular point. Now, for the religions, in order for them to accept this, we need another final climactic occurrence.
Yeah.
Now, they're talking about building the third temple, right? And the theology that the Jesuits have put out there in the world to counter the Reformation theology on the Antichrist is that he will make his appearance, or that the Christ will come to the temple, and that he will then there proclaim his kingdom. And we know from the spirit of prophecy that he will proclaim that the Sabbath has been changed. So this must take place while this melting pot is on the way. So let's just look at this third temple issue before we wrap it up. So let us just look how they're going to fit this all in. Here's an article on coronavirus, and it says that the pandemic as a trigger for the first temple. And does it mean the current corona crisis could herald the third temple? The trigger for the construction of the first temple in Jerusalem was an epidemic that broke out as a result of King David's mismanagement of a national census. Now some are wondering to what extent the current pandemic will play a role in the building of the third temple. The timing and the choice of location for the first temple on Mount Moriah were both related to David's census, though it would of course be his son Solomon who built the shrine. But it was David who purchased the holy site in Jerusalem and built an altar there to the God of Israel in order to bring an end to the epidemic. Now what these people are saying is that there must be a universal involvement here because the epidemic is universal. But that epidemic only affected Israel.
Yes.
Because of a bad choice. Because David didn't trust in the might of God to deliver him from his enemies. He wanted to count the people to see what his strength was.
Yes.
He forgot that his strength came from God. I'm wondering whether these people are making the same mistake. Now, Martin, this temple is going to be an important issue, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It's going to be a climactic occurrence on the earth. Has there been a dry run somewhere in the world? Have they practiced this initiative?
Yes. In Sao Paulo in Brazil.
They built a temple.
Yeah. Temple of Solomon.
They built the Temple of Solomon. And did it attract world leaders and thousands of people?
From all over the world, pilgrims, different faiths coming together.
And can we say this is a precursor for another great event that will bring the whole world together? Was the issue of solidarity an important one then?
Yes.
So will the issue of solidarity be important in the end? Let's have a look at this. They discussed this major...
Yeah, this was a while back, 2014, that it was unveiled, the temple.
So let's have a look at the dry run.
The Temple of Solomon, the new headquarters of the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God, was inaugurated in Sao Paulo with President Dilma Rousseff and many of the highest authorities in the country present. It was a special day. The sanctuary is the biggest in Brazil and one of the biggest in the world. It was expected that more than 15,000 people would attend. The main facade of the temple is the height of an 18-story building and is a mosaic of stone brought from Hebron. Then the Ark of the Covenant was taken into the new temple. In the same way that priests did this in Israel, bishops and pastors carried the Ark. Inside it are symbols of the Christian faith and the traditions of the Jewish people. The procession was followed by thousands of people. Trumpets announced the arrival of the Ark. The Ark was received in the main hall, a space for 10,000 people, which was completely full. It was a replica of the Ark used in the past to keep the tablets of the Ten Commandments, which represent the presence of God for all people.
The president attended the entire service. At the end of the ceremony, Dilma visited the other areas of the temple dedicated to the preservation of the 12 tribes of Israel. Then she saw the replica of the tabernacle, which was used for centuries in the desert to worship God. Before leaving, the president spoke about the importance of the Temple of Solomon.
It is a house of prayer, and a house of prayer is a house of peace, a house of harmony. So it has great importance for Brazil in the sense that it represents, symbolizes values. The Colombian who planned his trip for 2 years says that it is a privilege to be here.
There is a light, something really powerful. I felt the presence of God.
This is one of the caravans of pilgrims from Africa, people from different countries. People came from the interior, traveling for 4 or 5 days to arrive here and experience the Temple of Solomon. The faithful approached the altar. This was one of the moments of greatest emotion. The ceremony was attended by representatives of different religions and from all parts of the world in the same faith.
Que desce como fogo.
A forerunner of things to come?
Maybe.
All the nations together? It's interesting that you said that the ark contained symbols of Christianity and Judaism, although originally, of course, it didn't contain anything but the 10 Commandments, the pot of manna, and Aaron's staff. But we are heading for very fascinating times. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 5. Hear the word of the Lord, ye that tremble at his word. Your brethren that hated you, that cast you out for my name's sake, said, let the Lord be glorified, but he shall appear to your joy, and they shall be ashamed. In Matthew 10, verse 22, we read, and you shall be hated for all men for my name's sake, but he that endureth to the end shall be saved. I believe the world is on an express train to disaster. The new education is nothing other than a universal Jesuit education. The new solidarity is a solidarity in principles which you will not find in the Bible. And the rules and the regulations that govern this new world order, this common good, will be such that they directly contradict the law of God. And God's people have to make a choice. And either we sit in solidarity, or we have one God, one faith, one baptism. That's our choice. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are living in the very tips of the toes of Daniel's statue. And all that we have spoken about is in the news media. Everything that is written in prophecy is portrayed on the screens that people watch on a daily basis. May the God of all comfort be with us as we head into the final moments of Earth's history. And may we be empowered through his grace to make the right choice. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.